Greetings, my brothers and sisters. Sending gratitude to all of you who are joining in today to accompany us down the rabbit hole of self-exploration through plant medicines. My name is Ryan Sprague, and I'm here to tell you that your frequency is now set and tuned to explore psychedelic medicines and the impact they've made among the countless psychonauts exploring the last true frontier. Buy a ticket and take the ride with me as we get true first-hand accounts of the experiences, benefits, risks, and transformations taking place within the ever-expanding world of psychedelic medicines on This One Time on Psychedelics. Hanging with us today on the show is a man who is no stranger to plant medicines and the development that can take place when we use them consciously and with intention. He is the CEO and facilitator of Training Camp for the Soul, which is a program dedicated to helping individuals process stored trauma so they can live their lives full out. Is the founder and facilitator of Embodied Man, which hosts men's leadership retreats, and he has over 15 years experience in the coaching world, ranging from health to fitness, mindset, leadership, business, healing, and more. So, without further ado, would you all be so kind as to help me in welcoming my man, Chris Marhefka, to the show? My man, we're doing it.
Thank you, brother. We're doing it. We're here.
Yeah, man. You know, it's funny, man. We were just together. What was that? Like 2 weeks ago? Has it been 2 weeks already? Yeah. It's crazy, man. For those listening, I just did the Training Camp for the Soul retreat. And if you haven't heard of Training Camp for the Soul before, you should go check it out because you're missing out. Second of all, it is by far the most influential self-development practice / program I have gone through to date. It's challenging as hell, and it will literally bring you into more authenticity with yourself than you ever thought imaginable. So just go check it out. All right. Just go check it out already. And after that, we got to hang out and go to Trevor Hall at Red Rocks, which was absolutely beautiful to be back in a show environment with all the bubbies. If you haven't checked out the Bubby Collective on Instagram, go check it out. Yeah, man, that was such a beautiful time. And to be sitting here with you now, sharing this ride together, man, we're the luckiest men on earth, you know?
Really are. Yeah, certified. Certified, approved.
Yes, dude.
Gold stamp.
Yeah, gold stamp, man, you know? And yeah, so, you know, I think a really good place to start, you know, I love checking in with people for how their experience and awareness of psychedelics began. You know, I imagine, knowing some of your background, that you weren't always like, hey, psychedelics are the best thing, right? Not that you're like that now, but, you know, more so that like myself, when I started hearing about psychedelics, I grew up with the DARE program. I grew up with things that were telling me, hey, anything you take to change your consciousness, except alcohol, you know, is terrible and the devil, right? Which is kind of funny that it's actually the reverse, but, you know, you know there. But so, like, I had a lot of stigma towards it, and it took a little while to get that to come off of me. So I'm curious, you know, what was your path with regards to that? You know, we're similar ages. We grew up in very similar times, and I'm curious what you went through on your journey to get to where you are now with psychedelic medicines.
Yeah, what you just described is pretty verbatim of my experiences as well. Growing up with drugs are bad. Okay, yeah, like
just say no. All right,
they're just say no. My parents, from what we've now discussed and what I imagined, they were clean cut. They didn't have the experience of going into drugs when they were younger, and so they passed that on to me. And they just didn't understand. I think they grew up in a polarized society around it as well. And I think that polarization is coming back in a way. And what I mean by polarizing is anytime there's like a group of people that have had an experience, it's very different from other people's experience, and it's hard to understand the other side. And so I think that what's happening now is with people being more open, the internet and social media, and like people are sharing more about their experience, and included in that has been psychedelics. And that was one of the things that shifted for me as I started to listen to people that I admired that were doing some things in the world of life and business that I admired. And they were also talking about psychedelics and expanding their consciousness. I was like, wait a minute, I was told these were actually opposing.
Yes.
And now some people that I'm looking at, they're actually saying it was not only just not opposing, negation acknowledged, but it actually was a contributor to their success and fulfillment in life. And there was more people that I started hearing talking very positively about it, which is when I started to open more to it. But frankly, I went most of my adult life without really diving deep into drugs. I mean, other than some cannabis use recreational in the past and a copious amount of alcohol. I pretty much stayed away from just about every other substance. And it was only because I didn't understand it. I didn't feel safe to do it. Like I didn't understand enough to feel safe, and I wasn't with people that felt safe to do it with. And so I just avoided it altogether until I started getting around more people that had personal experience with it, were personally more educated in it. And I started to open up more. And then my first like really true psychedelic experience wasn't until June 2019, which not that long ago, especially like thinking about like reflecting on all the things that's happened in the 2-year period, how much growth. It just seems like that's in the really recent past.
Yeah.
And I found enormous use in it in getting deeper into things, getting deeper into patterns, getting deeper into the unconscious, into awareness that wasn't already there. So yeah, I found a lot of use of it. And I mean, we can talk about the positives of it, but yeah, I was raised very much in the don't touch it, stay completely away from it. And it frankly scared me. And I think that's where a lot of people are today. And yeah, fortunately I had a amazing introduction to it. I had amazing mentors in it that knew a lot more than I did and could give me the cliff notes on what to do, what not to do.
Yeah.
And then I just started experimenting safely to understand like, where was I using this to benefit my own life and how could I do more of that?
Yeah. I love that, man. And, one thing you brought up there, which I think is very important to reiterate is that you were scared beforehand, right? Which is what I was, the main, thing going on with me before I got into psychedelics was, and you're right. Like, I feel a lot of people that maybe you're listening to this right now are on the fence, right? Or they've done them before, right? And they're still nervous. I mean, I still get a little nervous before I do any plant medicine, even a microdose, because you never really like, you do know, but also, these medicines, these teachers are meant to throw you for certain loops and challenge you in certain ways to allow you to grow, right? And so, I'm curious, before you had tried psychedelics, do you remember your biggest fear that you had about just the whole overarching theme of psychedelic medicines?
Lose my mind. Like I thought I was going to go crazy.
Yeah.
That was it. I was like, what if I like go crazy? Like, and I have to get into a mental institution because I've lost my mind.
Yes.
And I liked my mind. I was like, I don't want to completely shatter my life. I just want to like incrementally improve it.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, it not only supported me in losing my mind, but in piecing it back together in a way that was much more useful for me than the way my mind was operating before.
Yeah.
So my greatest fears did play out on occasion, but the outcome of it was way better than I imagined.
Yeah. That's awesome, man. And, I'm glad you brought up the mind because I know you have a lot of experience with shaping the mind and just the mind in general. And I'd love it if you could, in your own words, kind of talk to or speak to how you feel psychedelics help the mind, because just like you said, you did lose an aspect of your mind, but it was the part that was essentially chaining you down, right? And I know for myself personally, the aspects of my mind that I've been able to move through and still come up here and there, but now I'm aware of them, are like the perfectionism, the people pleasing, the anxiety of what are people going to think, that weight that I was carrying. Right. And so, yes, I did lose those aspects of me as well, but those aspects were not in my highest good or my highest alignment. So I'm curious how you would, speak to that in terms of maybe if someone's listening, they haven't done psychedelics and they're new and they're enjoying the whole like up leveling of self-development with their mind and everything. What did they do for you in terms of plasticity, things like that? How would you describe that?
Yeah, that's awesome. I think about the mind as like this programmable supercomputer. And it's the mind is like our operating system of like how our life plays out. It's like how we think, how we speak, how we walk, how we talk, or how we just believe the world to be. And if you think about like the operating systems that we're using today on my Mac versus like Windows XP, there's been a lot of upgrades, a lot of changes, and they operate very differently. And so I think about minds the same way, is that we start with a very simple operating system, and we're always either we're improving it with like changing this feature and upgrading this feature, or we're just reiterating the old. And so when a script plays out, it just reinforces that script. So we're all walking around with some scripts that are really reinforced, that we just keep doing over and over again. We call these our behaviors, our patterns, and these can be physical, emotional, mental. And so we're all walking around with them. And a lot of the work that I do is in taking pieces of that code, that operating script, and just pulling it out and like almost like putting it up on the screen and saying like, hey, is this serving you? Yes or no? And people know instantly, like, oh, people pleasing, not serving me. Okay, like loving unconditionally, serving me. Okay, cool. Yeah. Put that in that box. Okay, cool. And so we pull up the ones that are obviously not serving us, and we look at them. And by look at them, I mean like we dive into them. Okay, where did this come from? What's the root of this? Like, how's this showing up in my life? And we just like go head first into them. What I find that the realm of psychedelics does is that it pulls a lot of that code to the surface at one time, and oftentimes in ways that we were not aware of it. So for me now, I use them specifically to go deeper into things that are already there. I have some level of awareness around, and I go in with certain intentions, and it just shows me in a very different way. It's like if we were to take someone who's never seen the operating system of your mind, like an expert programmer, and they were to come in, you hire them to like figure out the bugs in your computer, and they come in, they start pulling all these things out, and they're like, oh, here's the thing, here's the thing, here's the thing. And you, who have been in the operating system all the time, you're like, oh wow, like I never would have noticed that because I'm in it. I'm seeing the code every day. I'm very aware of how this works. But it's almost like this completely objective person coming in and saying like, okay, here's all these things. And what it does is it doesn't actually do the fixing for you. I think that is the part that like I've really come to realize as my experience has deepened, is that it just shows you. It's still on you to do the work, to dive into it. And so the expert coder comes in, they pull the code out, they're like, hey, work on these parts. And now you get to say, okay, I'm going to take this part, I'm going to work on this one, and work on this one, and then I'm going to replace it as I can. But that work is all done outside of the ceremony. It's outside of your session. And I think that's the part that I love talking about with psychedelics, because I was fortunate enough to do a lot of deep healing work without it. And then when I introduced it, it was just like more rocket fuel, because I already knew how to integrate it with the work. And then when I got more and more awareness, I was just like, okay, let's go. There was no resistance. I was like, okay, you showed me that. Like, yeah, it fucked me up a little bit, but like now I see it. Now I know. Now I can dive into it. And so we can always change these lines of code in our programming in our mind. It's just a matter of like, which ones are we aware of? And then once we see them, what are we really willing to change or let go of to make that shift?
Yeah, that last part right there, what are we willing to let go of? That part really like threw me for a loop. One of my first big experiences with psychedelics. And, before I started experimenting with psychedelics, I had done like self-development in the realms of like very simple, simplistic mindset work and exercise really, and health, like healthy diet, etc. And so I started piecing things together, doing more research. And that's actually how I got fully into self-development, right? So we had a little bit of a backwards journey, you and I, in that respect, and something I was, thinking of when you were mentioning like, diving into people's work and whatever, was asking like, what is the real problem here, right? Like, when did this start, et cetera? Getting clear on that question for me has helped me so much. And that's something that for anyone listening, if you're ever going through a psychedelic experience and it's getting challenging, trying to solve it with the same level of thinking that created it, aka the mind, can sometimes run you into a muck. And so a question that I love that, Chris alluded to here too, is like just asking a simple question to yourself, like, what's the real issue here? What's the real problem? What's really going on here? And if you can get to that quicker, then it will most likely sting a lot more than the things you're thinking of, right? Because it's actually the real thing going on, but also it will free you a lot as well. The other thing I was thinking too was that it's an immersive experience, right? Like when you get to go in there on psychedelics, you're bypassing, in my own experience, the working mind, right? So really all you have is presence. Like one of the recent journeys that really like threw me for a loop was this whole idea of me slowing down, right? Which is something that you and I know a lot about, and you know about me specifically. And it's been such a beautiful journey in doing that. And I would be safe in saying that like the real first way I experienced what slowing down was, because to me, I'm living life a certain way. I then hear from people, hey, you need to slow down. And originally I'm like, I like being speedy. It's fun. That's not what it meant. Like what it meant was like the constantly not being able to relax and not being able to do things. I was essentially running a malware program, right? Which told me you can't relax, sleep when you die, etc. All these things you hear about, which by the way are a lie. Story. It's like sleep when you die, unless you have a really comfy bed, then you should probably sleep because it's awesome. But when I experienced going past the mind for the first real time, I experienced laying in my bed for about 4 hours, just staring at the ceiling, completely content. And I just remember thinking, now this is relaxation. Like, and it clicked in me. I immediately knew, because I had done the previous work. This is, only a couple of years ago, because I had done the previous work. Actually, a year ago, I had done the previous work to understand like, okay, this is something that other people who I trust are seeing in me. I don't yet understand it, but let's go into it. Like you were saying with this, this general cast of the fishing rod, right? Like not a specific intention, but with the intention of becoming aware of things I might not be seeing yet. And when I went in there, I got to experience what slowing down was, which if you ask me, and I imagine you too, like the best way to tell someone how to do something is to show them what it feels like themselves, right? Which is something that's helping a lot. And so I experienced that. Then I came out of it and said, okay, what are some things I can do to help slow down? And then begin the integration part, which we'll get to a little later. But generally, like, that immersion really helps you narrow your focus for someone like me who was so scatterbrained into saying like, okay, that's the problem or the challenge, whatever. That's my challenge right now. Let's go work on that. And the other thing I thought of when you were speaking was, that essentially what psychedelics are is they're tools, right? And you were talking about self-development and everything in the regards, which what I came up with in my head was, imagine that self-development is a rock and you've never had a hammer. So you've been hammering in hammering in nails with a rock, right? So therefore, when someone hands you a hammer, right, aka psychedelics, you're like, oh, I get the general gist of how to use this, right? Versus like if you'd never picked up anything that hammered a nail into anything, you'd be kind of like, I don't know. And with a hammer, you could hurt yourself a little bit worse than at work, depending on the rock size, That part of the analogy didn't hold up, but the rest of it was really good, But it's like, it's interesting because me personally, I feel as though psychedelics and self-development are interwoven. They have to be, really. It's a have to for me personally, because if we don't, we're doomed to just continue repeating the same lessons without actually learning anything from them. And so that brings me on to the next question, which is, what are some of the most powerful lessons you've learned on psychedelics? Is there one that sticks out? Is there a general theme? Tell us about that. Hey, everybody. I hope you're enjoying the show. I wanted to take a quick moment to let you all know that the doors are officially open for the Conscious Cannabis Collective. And as such, this is the last week you can sign up and receive all of the bonuses we're currently including. This is the last time I will be personally onboarding those of you who sign up with a complimentary one-on-one session, and you'll have the ability to get the Grow with Cannabis course for free during this limited time. For more info on how you can take advantage of this offer, head down to the show notes for this episode and secure your spot today, as we only have so many spots left and they are filling up quickly. Now back to the show.
Yeah, that's a really good question. My first big psychedelic experience reconnected me to, uh, I'll just put it, anything outside of myself. And it connected me to nature, God, universe. Up until that point, I had considered myself atheist, agnostic, just wasn't present in my awareness at all. And so psychedelics were the thing that really reconnected me to spirituality,
Hmm.
towards anything greater than myself. It also always gives me some form of lesson that I am in control of my life.
Hmm.
Like I'm the creator. Like I'm creating this. That's
Hmm.
like a universal thing. It just shows me like, oh, this is where you were creating this pattern. You are creating it though. And like you can also create something new. And so it's like a very empowering lesson every time I get it. And it shows up in very different ways all the time, but that's always there. Slowing down to more presence, like to the point that it always comes to some level of like priorities and values. It's like, this is what's really important in life. And
Hmm.
it's just always some level of reminder of that. It's like, okay, all these distractions don't matter. What's really important is this. It's like love and connection with others and being more authentic to yourself and speaking your needs and your, like whatever it may be. It always slows down so much that it's like, so simple. It's like, this is what matters in life. This is what matters right now.
Yes.
And forget all the rest. And like, there's always something like that.
Yeah.
So it's almost like a reset every time. Like when I do with intention and I go in, it's always a reset in some way, in some area of my life. I'm like, oh, this is what really matters. Just like I've been worrying about all this other bullshit. This is what
Yeah.
really matters. Yeah.
Yeah, man, I am so glad you spoke to that point because that is precisely since I began highly optimized. Every time I do a plant medicine experience, it just doubles, triples, quadruples, quintuples down on the fact that really like my life's work, which is highly optimized, is my number one priority, right? Which, on the topic of like masculinity, right? Like a man's purpose is his number one thing in life, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, we can go into all that in what the world currently looks like with masculinity
Mm-hmm.
kind of fractured in a lot of different ways. But one of the things I wanted to talk about first was, you mentioned priorities and values, right? This is something I've been really like curious on recently, and it's going to be a little bit of a pivot, but it leads in, which is like, in order to even understand or understand what priorities and values are, let alone what they are for us individually, we need to have some type of context of what is actually important in the world, right? And one of the things that I've been really riffing on is the idea that since we've done much less rites of passage, right, which a lot of times includes psychedelic medicines,
Mm-hmm.
as a society, both males and females, and I can speak again for myself, it took me a long time to actually come online to what was very important for me.
Mm-hmm.
It was about 2021 that I came online versus I imagine, 12, 13, right? And one of the ways I see this happening is because with a rites of passage, you're essentially moving like more towards spirituality and away from material possessions, right? That's one of the things that I've been riffing on. And so I'm curious, do you feel as though psychedelics are providing this almost DIY rite of passage for a lot of people that they may not be getting in a tribal, in a tribe
Yeah.
or in society, etc.?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I absolutely believe they can be. And the rites of passage are just challenging periods of, like, when I say challenging, I just mean uncomfortable. And it's almost a proving to yourself of leveling up. It wasn't even about, the rites of passage weren't about the tribe and the collective. It was like, it was proving to yourself. And that's what everyone was like participating in them for. It's like, okay, now you're a man because you did this one thing. You proved that you could do this and do this and do this. And I think most people are sheltered and going further down the path of sheltering themselves from discomfort because they believe that the short-term comfort is going to be better for them in the long run. But really, the short-term discomfort is what leads to massive expansion and like a life of fulfillment. I'll use the example of like even just the rite of passage of having the first really confronting, challenging conversation with your partner.
Mm.
So if you think about it, a lot of people will avoid that like the plague until it blows up in their face and it's now out of control, and they'll suppress it, and then it'll explode. Whereas had you had the courage and the resources and the tools to face it head on, in the moment, it would have brought up a lot of discomfort. But then on the flip side of it, the relationship is always deeper. You get to hear someone else's experience. You get more intimate with them. And I think that always outweighs like facing it in the moment always outweighs the long-term dragging it out. And I think for psychedelics, it is that momentary discomfort. Like it shows you stuff that like sucks sometimes to see. And you're like, damn, or it can be scary, or it can be just like shameful. But it's in that moment you get to say, oh, this is an opportunity for me to deal with the discomfort now and not continue dragging this discomfort on for the rest of my life. So I think it very much can be a rite of passage in that way. Not from like the physical part, like, I did the five grams of mushroom, but from just like the standpoint of like, I'm willing to dive into deep into myself to deal with the things that are there. They're there for all of us that aren't serving us. And I'm willing to do it now. I'm willing to do it repeatedly. I'm willing to go deeper in them so that I don't have to play them out unconsciously and let them control my whole life.
Yeah. Yeah, that last statement is powerful because, I mean, I'll take nail on the head for 500, please, of what's happening with a lot of people in the world that happened with me for a long time, too. And again, for those listening, like, you might be thinking like, well, I don't have any of that. Again, you won't be aware to it until you actually bypass the mind, which is telling you this is all just normal.
It's all good. Yep.
Return to your normal job. Nothing to see here,
Nothing to see.
Yeah, nothing to see here, for sure. We give you Scout's honor, and you mentioned uncomfortability. And I think for a lot of people that term can scare them, right? Like, what is uncomfortability, And so could you give a couple examples as to ways in normal waking reality that people could practice the art of being uncomfortable?
Yeah, absolutely. The mechanism to create the discomfort, I believe, doesn't matter so much because it all gets to a similar outcome. And I'll first go into the outcome, and then I'll go into some ways to get there.
Cool.
The outcome is that something happens in your body, a sensation arises, you feel something in your body. And that's the outcome that we're trying to get to, because every single thing in the world is causing some level of response in your body. It's just how much are you aware of it, and how much are you aware of that thing guiding your thoughts and your actions. So, for instance, people are afraid. They have fear in their body, this sensation of fear. They're tight, they're contracted, they're closed. And if they're unconscious to it, their whole life is going to be designed around avoiding the fear, the sensation they're calling fear, which means that all of their decisions will be just avoiding fear, avoiding the scariness. And so when you use different things to get uncomfortable, it just, all it is in your own body, something is happening. And when you feel that discomfort, it's just a matter of sitting with it and actually focusing more on it. So it's like, oh, I feel this like tightness in my chest when I want to go talk to this person, rather than avoiding it or distracting from it. It's the practice, and the outcome that we want is going into it. Be like, okay, what is this? Interesting. Okay. This brought this up. This brought this thought up, this belief up, like, oh, they're not going to listen to me, or no, they're going to judge me, or whatever. And so when you breathe into it and just feel the sensation, what happens is the sensation lightens and it doesn't have a grip over you anymore. And so when it doesn't have a grip on you anymore, you can now go forward and you can be like, okay, it was uncomfortable to think about having this conversation with this person, but now I felt it, even just in the process of like imagining the conversation happening. This sensation came up. I felt it. It's not that scary anymore. I could do this. And then you can go out and actually do it. Whereas most people will be like, oh, that's scary. And then they'll just avoid it. And that'll be a thing they'll avoid for the rest of their life. And so that's like the outcome that we're getting at, is feeling the feelings that are inside of you. The way to get there can be, we'll call it emotionally. So name any emotion. Like it could be another person or a thing. Someone cuts you off in traffic. Like you get a bad grade on your report card and triggers you or whatever. Someone says something to you. So you're emotionally triggered and there's a sensation. You can do it physically. So physically, like taking ice baths or like going into a challenging workout for you, something that would hit your limits. That limit is just like, oh, this is an edge for me. And you can do it mentally as well. You can do it mentally in meditation or deep contemplation. So there's a lot of ways where you can get to that outcome. But once you get to it, the process is the same. Just feel what's there. Feel what's there without thinking through it, without making sense of it, without judging it or making it right or wrong. You just feel what's there. Feel what's there. And then you can be free of it.
I love that. You know, it's so interesting too, because that's how I always explain cold showers and ice baths and even combo, right? Like combo is kind of like a quasi physical, mental, and spiritual challenge all at once, you know? I just had Dave Robinson on the other day, and his episode's dropping this week. And we talked a lot about combo, you know, and it's interesting because what I've found personally with things that challenge me, like cold showers, like ice baths, is like, yeah, it's like uncomfortable, right? Like it's not comfortable. But then again, like for those listening who are gym junkies, right? The first time you ever lifted weights, I bet there was a voice in your head that said every single rep, right, was like, all right, you're done now, right? Okay, you can be done now. You did enough, right? But now I imagine those same people going to the gym and they're like every rep, they're just like they feel the world, right? Well, what's to say that you can't, you know, streamline that to any other uncomfortable feeling in your life, right? When a conversation comes up between you and your partner and it's like that, ooh, feeling, you can actually get to the point with enough reps where you're like, hey, I'm excited because I know the other side is worth it. I know on the other side is freedom, is more love, is more connection, right? And so I love that, man, you know, like, you know, embracing uncomfortability, right? Because for me personally, comfort was a huge lie for me. You know, I mean, think about how many people, just as like a funny example, have back conditions from too much lazy boy action, right? Like, you know, and I'm talking lazy boy chairs. I didn't just diss people, but like, you know, like lazy boy chairs, you know, like comfort, right? Something that's meant to make us comfortable is now actually weakening our postural muscles, right? And leading to a host of different issues. And, you know, this brings up a very interesting topic, right? Since we're on the subject of uncomfortability and we're talking about psychedelics, I'd love to chat with you about some of the challenging times you've had, right? Like, you know, I imagine there's been, and, you know, I know for me, there's one that always sticks out. If you've had more than one, you know, I'd love to hear about all of them. But what was the challenge that you were facing and how did you process that and were able to move through it during your psychedelic experience and then through integration?
Yeah, I've definitely had some challenging experiences, and I oftentimes talk about my first one because my first one I think a lot of people can relate to in the sense that the challenge was simply me hanging on so tightly to like thinking the way things are, and it just kept pounding me with like, no, it can also be this. It just kept like pounding me with like, no, and you're going to let go of thinking this way. And my strong ego was just gripping so tightly, and it kept getting heavier and darker and more fearful. And I was screaming and crying, but all of it was a result of me just hanging on to thinking like, I have all the answers in the universe and I know exactly the way things go. And as soon as like I got to the point where I was physically, mentally, and emotionally exhausted, probably hours into my first journey, I completely just like collapsed, like, and I was just like, okay. And in that moment, it all shifted. It was all beautiful and it was all light and levitt. And it was like, see, like you are resisting yourself. It's like, you're the one that's getting in your own way. And like, I think that's a really common challenging experience. Now I know going into it, when I have that similar experience of like, it's starting to get really rough, I'm like, where am I the one that's holding myself back? Where am I the one that's resisting, like letting this happen? And I use it anytime things, this is kind of a side note, but anytime things do get challenging, I use an affirmation from that first journey that a friend of mine told me. It's like, you took a medicine and the medicine's working. It's like, you thought you knew how the medicine worked. That's your fault.
Now you know for sure.
Now you know. It's actually working this way.
Yeah.
And that was probably the most challenging, just because I was gripped so tightly to the way I believed things were, that it was really, really dark. I had and that was dark for a few hours. During some of my ayahuasca experiences, when I sat with Aya, I did see a lot of like collective pain and collective trauma and collective hardship. And it was almost as if I was, the lesson that I got from that, like, it was really dark and really scary. Like, I was in experiences, like I was in the Holocaust, like I was in like genocide, I was in being lit on fire. In that experience, what I took from it was, in the work that I do now, I think it was showing me like the sensation or the feeling of just complete darkness and complete pain and complete suffering, so that I could empathize when I'm working with people and healing, to know what is internally going on for people. Because a lot of people are walking around with enormous amounts of suffering at all times. They're fighting an internal battle that we know nothing about. And I think in a way it was not just showing me, but I was experiencing all the pain of humanity, so that I could truly empathize with any person that came in front of me. And that was definitely the darkest day and seat with any psychedelic that I've ever had, for sure. I also had recently with Combo, actually, I had something that I was bringing to the table. I wanted to feel deeper what it felt like to, this may seem silly to go in with an intention, but to be scared, to be fearful, to have what I previously would call for myself like weaker emotions, like to be held, to completely like release and be in vulnerability. Because my intention was to be more vulnerable, to like be held by others, to be supported by others. And I realized that in my life, I haven't really feared for my life too often. Like, I've been in the dark alley fights. I've been held under by massive waves surfing. I got charged by a grizzly. And like, I can name on one hand the handful of times I've been in fear of my life. And all of those are more like nature situations and external physical. And so I wanted to feel, and silly enough, when I went into combo, I went really deep and my throat started closing and I was like, oh fuck, I'm going to die. I was like, I think I'm going to die. And that was the first time in my life where I was like, oh wow, like this is it. And like, I had to sit with it and process it. And I was truly afraid, but that's what I was asking for. And in that, I had to be supported by the person who was there facilitating me. And I had to truly receive, because always in the past, I would receive from people, but I would still be in control. It'd be like, yeah, I'll let them help me out, but like, I know I'm still the one holding me. And I wanted the experience of being like fully held. And like, I fucking got it. Like, I was like, I was like, my body's not working. I can't anymore. Like, I'm letting go. Like, I gotta be supported. Yeah. And like, that was scary as shit. Yeah. Those are the ways in which sometimes we either we call in or we're ready to see lessons. And sometimes we don't like the way that they're shown to us, but in the long run, if we see them as opportunities, like I believe they can be. But if we see them as darkness and fear and just evil for evil's sake, then that's how we're going to experience a bad trip, as they call it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, a download that I just got as we were, speaking, and I have a funny story about throats closing up and stuff too, which I didn't know we had the same experience before. But, also like you were talking about at training camp, with past lives, right? Like, how do we know that, this fear is not coming up because it's a past life fear, right? Something we were afraid of in a past life, right? I know, in your case, it was around your throat. You can, talk about it if you want. I'm not going to, say it myself, but it's interesting and definitely makes me curious about that, because I had an experience a couple of years ago, about 3 years ago, 2017, I believe, that, up until that point, I had done a lot of mushrooms, and always had a great time, right? Always did them like responsibly enough. I mean, I was young, so, it wasn't anything like, setting the right container or whatever, but I wasn't doing them at parties. I was doing them like in the comfort of my own home, trying to put on music that would work right, et cetera, right? So I had numerous mushroom experiences, and some are very deep. And, at the time when I was younger, I didn't exactly know how to articulate them. My friends and I decided to do a 18-gram penis NVT, me and two of my friends. Yeah. And, again, like we hadn't really learned the difference between different strains and psilocybin content. And I'm a cannabis grower too. So that was pretty embarrassing to realize. Wow, I didn't even realize there were different amounts in these things. So, grown a lot since then. And so needless to say, it was the perfect experience. What happened was the journey starts. We're watching something funny, and I start laughing so hard that it just it almost seemed like I couldn't, how usually you have a laugh, right? And it's like, ha ha ha. It is like I couldn't fast enough, and it was building up, and eventually it triggered something in me. And within a millisecond, it was like, what literally went through my head was, I'm choking. The mushrooms were moldy, and now my throat is closing up due to mold poisoning. And it happened literally within a fraction of a second. I knew that to be true. And I felt real fear for the first time, which you were talking about, this just fear of and meanwhile, I'm with two other people. Luckily, they're my good friends, but I'm trying to hold it together. I'm keeping control, So I'm like, hey, can we switch to, something else, And they're like, sure, I guess. So we switch, and in my head, I'm like, I'm fine. And every time I say I'm fine, the mushroom's like, no, you're not. So I'm like, I'm fine.
No, you're not.
And I'm like, oh my God. Cause they're like, we're doing this, man. You're going here. And so I'm like, I gotta go to the bathroom. I go in the bathroom. I try to puke. Nothing comes up. I'm like, I'm fucked. I'm dying. Then after about 5 minutes, I'm pacing. And then I realize wait a minute, my throat would have already closed. And then literally the cosmic giggle that hit my eardrums was hysterical. And they were like, we had to check you a little bit, because you were going up in amounts and you weren't really sure what you were messing with, and as a 20, God, whatever it was at that age, this was a very interesting time in my life. So, I decided after that I would start learning much more about what I was doing. And it was interesting because that experience, though, I had that same throat closing thing happen. And so the first time doing combo, I remember we were together actually. And I remember the person facilitating, one of the things he said, the last thing, I was like, all right, cool. I'm going to puke, all this stuff. Okay, awesome. I'll do it. The last thing he says is, and you might feel your throat closing up. And immediately I was like, oh
no,
that's going to be the number one thing. If anything's going to throw me up, it's going to be that. So when I did combo, my throat did feel like it was closing up, but it just didn't trigger the same response. So that would lead me to believe that whatever fear I was experiencing in that other moment has subsisted has gone away in some way, shape or form, I imagine if I say it's gone away completely, it'll be the next experience I have again. So I'm not going to say that. I've learned enough.
Yeah.
But it's very interesting. We had similar experiences in that respect, and for those listening, these kind of things can happen, which again is why I always suggest, if you're going to do psychedelics, to do it in a safe container with someone who can watch you, someone who is experienced, who understands these things. And it brings me to my next point, which is, what are some of the tools, tactics, and strategies you personally use to prepare for a psychedelic journey? And this can also lead into anything about set and setting you want to talk about, how you prefer to do them. Do you prefer to do them if you're going to do Aya in the jungle versus in a city, all those kind of things? I'd love to hear about all that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll start with probably the most universal, like highest impact is just being safe, feeling safe. And so that starts with we talk about set and setting, and who are you with? What's the environment? Like, would you be safe in this environment without psychedelics? First of all, if the answer is no, like, don't go do it. I like to think, if I was like completely out of it, like, would I feel safe just laying here in this spot? If the answer is yes, then like, okay, like I'll go move forward and do that. If the answer is no, like I won't be able to fully surrender to what's happening, because at some level of awareness, I'm afraid that like I can't completely go there because of, for whatever reason. And so that means, who are you with? Where are you? What's the environment? Like, is the music like subtle and gentle, or is it like blasting and very abrasive to your nervous system? Even like smells and light so like allowing all of your senses to feel really safe, all your five senses. And then your sixth sense of your nervous system, of your energy, is, before you even go into it, slowing down. Like I always do some form of dieta, which is some form of intentional living leading up to any big medicine ceremony, because it forces me to be intentional. And so anytime I'm doing dieta, it's like I may be shifting my diet a little bit, or I'm shifting my behaviors, or I'm journaling more often, where I'm reflecting on like, why am I doing this? What am I going into this with and for? And anytime I go in with more intention, I feel calmer going into it, which is safety. I'm feeling calm going into it. I'm much more present with why I'm there. It's not just like this hurried thing where I'm just like, okay. And then tomorrow I'm going to take like 10 grams of mushrooms and like, oh, just whatever. No, I'm thinking about it. I'm like, okay, why am I doing this? I'm being really intentional about it. And I find when those things are present, safety and intention, like a lot of things can go right. A lot of things can go right. When either one of those are missing, maybe not as useful, maybe not as beneficial, maybe a little bit more uncomfortable. For me, I like to either, when I'm going really deep in psychedelics, I either like to go with either solo or with people that I really trust. I don't like to journey myself with people that I don't know. I'll put it that way. Only because now, knowing what I do know in my experience with and without psychedelics, and it's almost like I sometimes slip into a role of a facilitator. Is like, if I have to support someone, I will, because like I fucking know what they're going through. And so I go solo, or I go with people that I really trust. Usually I recommend in small groups for everyone all the time. I mean, when I sat I sat with two of my best buddies, and then we had like maybe 3 or 4 other people there at times. But I hear people sitting like 60 people with Aya, and I'm just like, whoa, like that's a lot of energy. Like that's a lot. I think it does two things. One, it can be unsafe, and like people can genuinely take on that energy. They can take on like some things that you don't want. Or B, you'll stay so protected. You'll stay in resistance to what's happening because you feel unsafe at some level, and you won't get the full benefit. And so I think to get both the full benefit and also to like not have a negative effect on yourself, just go into the safest possible containers that you can. Yeah. And then also, I've learned this just through putting myself through the ringer, is like really checking in with who's making the decision to do this journey. Is this my ego? Is this truly my higher self, my heart, that's going into this because I know there's something that I can learn and experience? I've definitely had the ego trips for sure, where I've just done way too much just because it was just the thing to do. And
FOMO if you don't do it.
FOMO, yeah. And you know what's interesting is like we'll use like mushrooms for example. Yeah, like done the 15 grams on an ego trip, and it was horrible, and it showed me like a lot of darkness, and there was a lot of like things that showed up. Is like yeah, this is what happens when you act unconsciously. Don't be an idiot,
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah.
And it made it really uncomfortable. And then I've also done 15 grams of mushrooms with a lot of intention. It was beautiful and one of the most powerful trips. And so it's not about the amount. It's about like, what's your intention going into it? What are you bringing to it? And are you holding it sacred? Because like like, at least for me, my psychedelic experiences in like just about every single medicine that I've done, and I've done a pretty wide variety, they all treat me very similarly. It's like, if you go in as an asshole, it's gonna fuck you up. Like, if you go in with like kindness and peace and surrender, like, it's gonna be gentle on you, and it's like, it's gonna be nice.
Yeah. It's kind of like a supermarket in a way, right? If you go in there looking for healthy food, you're probably going to get a good result. But if you go in there stoned out of your gourd looking for Oreos, you might have an uncomfortable experience coming your way,
That's right.
Chris knows I love food analogies, so everything goes back to food, guilty as charged. But and it's interesting too, because one of the reasons I started this show is to be able to share some good laughs over this, right? Over a subject that really like is anything but laughable when you're on it, right?
Yeah.
So for everyone listening, like, there's a reason why I make a lot of this show very serious, right? Because it has to be, and that's, education, one of my biggest things. Yet that being considered, one of the questions I wanted to ask you, as I know you're a man of words also, is, say if someone has never done psychedelics before, right? And maybe this is even the first time they're even hearing about them, right? I don't know how they listen to the podcast, but let's just say they ended up here, right? And they were like, Chris, can you explain to me what it's like to do psychedelics? What would you say to them, right? Like, how would you explain that?
Oh, man. Okay. So reality melts, and like, everything changes about the way you see yourself in the world. Like, starting with like time, physical space, physical objects, like you will never see the world the same again. And so if you're ready to lift that veil, then like go there. If you're not ready, then like don't go there, because you can't go back. What is it like? It's every time it shifts something in me, every single time. Like, doesn't matter if it's a microdose or whatever, something shifts.
Yes.
And so man, it's like you're being guided in a very deep, I think about like, if like the Buddha himself was guiding you, it's both like deep and hilarious.
Yes.
All in the same time, and it's enlightening, but it's also like showing you dark shit, and it's like all instantaneous. I think about it as like, it has the possibility for the whole human experience to happen at one time.
I love that.
Anything and everything, like right now. And sometimes it happens that way, where it's like you have in one journey like the whole human experience.
It's interesting. I know we were at an event together where a guy experienced that, right? And and man, it was like the coolest thing to talk about after. I was like, damn, that's really fun. There was definitely parts for him that were scary, but coming out of it, he's like, that was really interesting. And the analogy that came to me, it like flashed in my head as you were talking, was kind of like, if you have a sandbox, right? Anytime you get into that sandbox, it's never going to be the same as what before you went in. Even if you try to rake it, even if you try to level it the same way, it's always going to be different, right? So that's kind of how I look at psychedelics, is no matter how little or how micro or macro your dose is, something is going to change, and it could be for better or worse, right? So that's why it's so important, like the things you were talking about before with set and setting, having the right people around, making sure that you're fit to be doing this, and also that the part of you that's wanting to do this is whole and pure, right? It's your heart. It's not your ego saying, well, so-and-so did mushrooms last week, so now I got to do mushrooms. Like, probably not going to end well. And, it's funny, that, a second ago I was talking about laughter, and I remembered something that came from my last mushroom experience. And this actually speaks to why integration is so important, right? Because As I started doing more psychedelics and at the same time doing self-development with them, I would notice, okay, I took a break for 3-6 months on psychedelics. I did XYZ program. And now, like, I didn't really make the connection, like, oh, maybe this will be different this time. I do a dose of mushrooms or something like that. All of a sudden, I'm getting shown much deeper layers of what's going on. Mm-hmm. And the last mushroom trip I had, my girlfriend Rachel and I, we journeyed together, and the way that we enjoy doing it these days is meditating through the whole thing, right? Mm-hmm. Almost like the Terence McKenna 5 dried grams in darkness method, Yep. And man, I unlocked some deep trauma, and like it was funny because I have this, looking into human design more and looking into a lot of different, astrology, whatever. I've learned that I have an extremely high emotional resilience, and like for those listening, like, oh, that sounds awesome. No, it's terrible because it makes it so frustrating to try to process emotions sometimes, because I can literally feel fine. Like after my father passed, for instance, right? Like in a really weird way. There was just part of me that was like, oh, I'm good with this, and it's like that was really bugging me. And so I tried with psychedelics at first to help unlock that. Didn't work, obviously, because I didn't have the context for it to work. Hadn't done a big mushroom trip in about a year, and went to training camp, went through I had gone through training camp, gone through a couple other programs, and understood the context of how to dive deeper. Had a big mushroom experience, and it was funny. I started laughing. And I had this thought, and I was like, oh, it's interesting. And I was talking to the air basically, because Rachel was in her own world. Yeah. I'm like, laughter is pretty similar to crying. I just had this random thing, and then all of a sudden, just all this trauma just unlocked, and I started crying for hours. And that was the first time I had cried, in no joke, since my dad had passed. So 7 years, I'm talking like a real cry. And even then, God, I probably hadn't cried like that since I was, 10, maybe. I'm talking like hours long crying, and it was so healing. And then I was able to hop into my journal, use my tools, and be able to work through it. So, in terms of tools to use to integrate, could you explain what you feel integration is in your own words? You can sum it up, pretty briefly. And then some of your favorite tools to help you integrate the experiences you have with psychedelics.
Yeah, I like to think about integration with another word. I call it stabilization. So stabilizing these concepts, ideas, thoughts, behaviors, patterns, stabilizing them in your waking world and your waking reality, what you experienced in your non-waking reality or your alternate reality, like your dream state or your psychedelic state. And so if you can bring that back into your waking reality, and you can stabilize it by taking actions that are in alignment with these things that you've experienced and that it showed you that you want to change or shift. I think the way that integration happens, I've tried to come up with the shortcuts and the secrets. It's simple and stupid. It's do the obvious action and do it over and over again. It's like, do the obvious thing. And so I believe that the healing can happen in an instant. Like you said, like when that instant happens in a millisecond, like something can shift and happen. But once you come out is when you but you get the opportunity to now take that momentary healing and almost like drag it longer into your reality. It's like, okay, I want to keep this. So I'm going to keep pulling it along, and to keep pulling it along, I have to do things consciously to remind myself of it. And so some of my favorite like reminding tools are definitely my journal. It's like every time I go in and out, even during journeys, I have my journal with me, and I'm just going through things. I'm not trying to understand them. I'm just letting them onto paper. I find that the journal is the best tool for seeing what the mind is doing, because you're literally taking what's happening inside the mind and putting it outside of the mind that you can look at it objectively and read. And so I think that's a really good tool. And the practice of choosing one thing and doing one thing. So if you come out of your next journey and you were shown very clearly this lesson for you, what is the obvious thing that you can do to make that shift in your life? So if it's loving yourself more, like what is something you can do in this very moment to love yourself more, and then do that, and then do it again, and then do it again, and then do it again. I like some level of structure. And so what I do is I have a morning routine that I integrate anything that whether it be from psychedelics or from other deep work that I'm doing, or just like some awareness. I'll do a practice where in the morning I'm like setting intentions for my day, and whatever's present to me, I'm gonna be intentional about these words and actions. And then at night, it's almost like a reflection. It's a reflection of my day. And it's like, this is where I showed up well, and this is where I want to have an intention to change going forward. And then as I go to bed, I'm like setting in the new as well. So we use affirmations in our work a lot with Training Camp for the Soul. And affirmations is just like taking the old programming code and then putting the new programming code in. So if it's like using the same example, like, I don't love myself, I love myself. I love and accept myself. I love myself fully. And it seems silly at first to like say these things and do these things because they're new. It feels like weird, feels like different. It's because it is. It's completely different than how you were operating before, but keep doing it and keep reaffirming it. And what happens is pure magic. You speak it into existence so much that it becomes who you are. It becomes the new behavior. It becomes the new thought process. And then it's almost like you forget there was ever another way. That's when you've literally unconsciously programmed yourself with the new. And so affirmations are really, really powerful. And the best integration tool that I use constantly is intentional breathing, period. Because when you breathe intentionally and you slow down, like you can program these into your life. You'd be like, okay, every time I get in the car to drive somewhere, I take 10 deep breaths. Or every time I come home from work, I sit in the car and I take 10 deep breaths before I walk in the house. Anytime I want to have a challenging conversation with my partner, I'm going to commit to taking 10 deep breaths before I even get to them. Every time I breathe intentionally. Every time I get triggered, I take a deep breath before I respond. And so all of this is programming space into your life that you can, that gives you an opportunity to choose. And so the breath and the slowing down is the integration tool, because it's giving you presence of like, okay, how would I would have reacted this way. Okay, I'm going to take a breath. Cool. I noticed that. I see what's happening. I'm being triggered. This is coming up for me. Okay. I'm anxious. I'm sad, whatever. And then you take another breath and you're like, okay. And how do I want to respond to this? Like, how do I want to experience this situation right now? And it may take you 3 breaths. It may take you 10 breaths. It may take you sitting there for 5 minutes if you're really triggered, but it's always worth it. It's always worth it to slow down and to breathe. In that space of presence is where you get to program your new life. And all the work that you've done up until this moment in time is accessible to you, and you get to choose to use it or not. But should you choose to not slow down and not breathe and just react and respond to life, it doesn't matter what experiences you've had. It doesn't matter what plant medicines you've done. If you're not using them in that one present moment right now to your best, highest advantage, then all that shit doesn't matter. You could do ayahuasca 60 times. And if you in the moment are just reacting and responding to life, then that shit doesn't matter. So take a breath, use all the tools that are accessible to you. Every lesson that's ever come to you is always there for you to reflect and go back to. But it takes that slowing down and breathing.
Words of wisdom right there, man. And yeah, for me, like the breath has been the number one thing in just slowing down, like how fast I was processing with my mind.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel for a lot of us, especially I I would say masculinity, not necessarily men, because feminine energy can definitely have a lot of masculine in it. And, one big thing for that, from my perspective, is this idea that the faster we go, the better we are, right? Especially, like, I'm from Boston, right? So it's like, especially as men, it's like the more we can get done, the more we can think, like the higher intelligence we have, right? Which, again, speed and intelligence are not, correlated necessarily, but this is like the frame of thinking that I got into for a while, which is like, no, the faster I move, the more successful I'll be. And that was a program I had to uproot from my father, and he learned it from his father. But when I was actually looking at, are they getting the results I want in life? The answer was a flat out no, right? Like, I don't want to end up living the way they did, right? So then it was like, well, why am I portraying the same patterns as them, right? And so then I had this awareness of like, okay, now I can, take that out of there and then use affirmations specifically to create the new programs. And, for those listening, like Chris said, affirmations can seem very silly at first. And I'll tell you why, in my opinion, and why they were silly to me at first, was because I was too smart for my own good. And what I mean by that is, like, you're telling me that I'm just going to say this thing and it's going to help. Yeah, it can actually be that simple. It doesn't need to be rocket science for it to help you, right? But yet a lot of us have made ourselves so smart that it's actually our biggest weakness now, And so that was something I wanted to add in there too, man. But Chris, this was an amazing ride, dude, getting to journey with you through psychedelic medicines, jump down the rabbit hole together. Where can I send people to learn more about you, learn more about training camp, just connect with you, talk with you, learn from you?
Yeah. ChrisMarhefka.com or Chris Marhefka on Instagram, and then trainingcampforthesoul.com. Those are the places that you'll find the work that I'm doing, and also a lot of fun stuff. And I share very vulnerably and honestly on my Instagram, so you guys will get some more cool stories on there.
Hell yeah. Hell yeah. And Chris, if someone listening was just swayed by you to experience psychedelic medicines for the first time, what piece of advice would you give them in order to have the smoothest experience possible?
The first piece of advice I would say is choose intentionally why you're doing what you're doing. So I guess said another way is, don't be swayed. Don't be convinced. Don't be told this is the right thing. Choose intentionally for yourself. If you go into the experience believing that it's because someone else told you to do it, then it's probably going to go poorly. If you choose to take your power back and say, I'm choosing this for my best good, then you're going to be better off. So first choose. And then the other thing that I would say is, because of the stigma, the resources are harder to find. So do it with or sit with someone you really trust. And that could be a friend, that could be a paid facilitator, but someone that you really trust in this. And I say that intentionally, because just because someone is a paid facilitator doesn't mean they are worthy of your trust yet. And so there's a lot of people that are facilitating plant medicine doesn't make them the right person. So really, the same way to choose what experience you're having, choose who you're having that experience with as well. Yeah, I think there's at least enough people that I admire and trust and respect that are talking about these things that, I would even say, like, the two of us on this podcast. I mean, if you want any advice, like, DM us, let us know. And I'm willing to help just about anyone who's willing to help themselves. And so reach out to me, reach out to someone you trust. Yeah. And always the old adage of psychedelics is like, always go with what you feel comfortable with. You can always take more. You can't take less.
Yes. Man, it's like they need to, I think we need to be the heroes we've been waiting for in that respect. I was just thinking about music festivals. I'm like, we need to make business cards that just, you can always take more, but you can't take less. And then just, pass those out to everyone, because I swear, having gone to so many of those, so many music festivals, and just like making like the face it, like watching what people are doing, it's that area of the world needs it real hard. So yeah, absolutely. Guys,
live to journey another day.
yes, exactly. And it's like minimum effective dose, like you want to
Yeah.
be able to keep the party going, like, in the words of Wayne's World, you don't want to be partied out, I mean,
Yeah.
come on, no one likes someone who's partied out,
Mhm.
Guys, I was recently hanging with Chris and was thrilled when, after talking about the show, he agreed to come on, out himself as a psychedelic user, share his wisdom and insights with all of you. And Chris is truly a testament to what can happen when we do the work necessary to not only be ready for the experiences plant medicines can bring us, but also integrate what they give us in order to allow our daily lives to benefit from these experiences instead of simply the hours we are under the influence of them. Having spent a lot of time with Chris and having gone to his trainings and retreats, I can attest firsthand to how well his teachings apply to the world of plant medicine work. And if you are curious about using plant medicines responsibly and learning the tools and tactics necessary to be able to benefit the most from them, then waste no time in reaching out to Chris to start that journey today. And on the topic of starting journeys, this new podcast is a brand new journey for me. And I would be so grateful if you could share the show with your friends and family and leave reviews on iTunes, as it helps me spread the show to the world at large and help the countless individuals out there looking to learn more about these incredible medicines learn about them. Chris, thank you again so much for hanging out with us today. And until next time, my friend, may your journey be full of light and your heart full of love. Aho.